You're now watching a series Notepad App with Python and Qt. This is episode 5, and we'll work on a save status and the unsaved dialog. With that said, let's dive in. There are a few scenarios in which we have to check whether the user has unsaved progress. The first one is when the user attempts to create a new file. The second one is when the user attempts to open another file. And finally is when the user attempts to close the application, either by mouse or by the keyboard. These scenarios here could potentially lead to the loss of progress, and therefore we need a custom dialog to warn the user about their unsaved progress. There are two ways which we can use to check for unsaved progress. The first one is event-based status. That means when a user changes the content of the text area, it fires an event that changes the save status. The second method is text comparison. That means we save the original content of the file and we compare it with the final context. The downside of the first method is that it is completely event-based. So even when the final content is exactly the same as the original, it will still be marked as unsaved. For the second method, the downside is, if the text is very long, it will take up a lot of memory. For our project, we will go for the first one, because we have no idea how long the text file will be, and we want to minimize the memory usage. Let's now look at the logic of the unsaved dialog. We have the root context, and it has a save method and a proceed action method. We also have the unsaved dialog context, which is a separate component. When there is unsaved progress, the root context will create a new unsaved dialog. If the user decides to save the progress, it will go through the save method from the root context and then go through the proceed action. If the user decides to discard the progress, then it will automatically call the proceed action method from the root context. Otherwise, if the user chooses cancel, then it will simply do nothing. With that in mind, let's now fire up Atom and convert this logic into real code. Let's create a new file, and we will name it unsaved.qml. At the top of the script, we need to import some modules from Qt. Qtquick 2.14, Qtquick.window 2.14, Qtquick.controls 2.14, and finally Qtquick.layouts 1.14. Below the imports, we are going to define the window for the unsaved dialog. Instead of the application window, we will be using just the window. Let's give it an ID of unsaved dialog. I'll set the minimum width to 300 pixels, minimum height to 100 pixels, and let's also set the maximum width and height. This way the size of the dialog window will always be the same, 300 by 100. And below, let's set visible to true, and for the title, let's set it to warning. We also have to set the background color for the window. Let's set it to white. Now inside the window, we need to give it a column layout. And for the column layout, I'll set the anchors.fill to parent, so the column layout fills the entire window. The first element will be a label, which is simply a text to tell the user about the situation. And for the alignment of the label, I'll set it to qt.align h center, so it is centered horizontally. Let's also add some top margin for the label. And for the text of the label, let's write a simple message. You have unsaved progress. Continue. And for the text color, let's set it to black. Now, below the label, we need to create a few buttons for the user to click. We need 3 buttons precisely, and I will position them in a row. So let's use a row layout. Let's give this layout some margins. For the buttons, I'll create them manually one by one instead of using a repeater. Let's first work on the Save button. And for the width and the height, I'll set it to 75 and 25 respectively. For the content item, it will be text. And for this button, it will be Save. For the Save button, I want it to be highlighted in a different color. So for the text color, I'll set it to white. And of course, we have to align the text both vertically and horizontally by using text.align e-center and align h-center respectively. For the background, it will be a rectangle with the color 008B8F. When the Save button is clicked, it should first close this dialog. And this is very important. We need to close it first before it executes anything. So Unsaved Dialog.close. And we're going to call roots.directSave method here. So it forces the root to save the current file. And after saving, it will call the proceed action method. Now let's take this Save button and duplicate it twice. And for the second button, it will be the discard option. And third one will be cancel. Let's modify the text as well. And let's change the color to black. Instead of using a highlighted color, it will be a gray color. Let's do the same for the cancel button. For the discard button, when it's clicked, we simply remove direct save here, so it directly proceeds the action without saving the current content. And for the cancel button, it simply closes this dialog and do nothing. There we have defined the 3 buttons. Additionally, before the buttons, and I'll add an empty item here. This item will have the fill width property set to true. And let's copy this one and put it behind the buttons as well. So what these 2 items here are doing is that they fills up the space between the buttons, because currently inside our layout we have 3 buttons, but they will be aligned to the left. And by placing 2 blank items which fills the width, the 3 buttons in the middle will be centered in the row layout. Let's go to the end of the script, and here I'm going to listen to the component.onCompleted event. This event will be called when this component has been initialized. Inside this method, we are going to center the dialog window relative to the root window. And we do this by directly setting the x property to roots.x plus roots.width divided by 2 minus unsaved dialog.width divided by 2. And we do the same for the y coordinate as well. And instead of width, we're going to use the height. And finally, we have to hide the root window. Let's mark this as initialization. Below, we also have to listen to the onClosing event, which will be triggered when this dialog window is closed. We have to remove the reference to this dialog window from the root context. And show the root window. There we have completed the dialog window. Let's now go to our main window context. And we're going to define a few new properties here. The first one is, of course, the reference to our unsaved dialog. And for the type, we can use variant. And let's call it Unsaved Dialog. We also need an other property, which is a boolean, called saved. Let's now go to the end of the script, and here we will define a new function called proceedAction. Let's define another property, which is a string called actionName. Inside the proceedAction method, we're going to copy everything inside the toolbar click handler and paste it inside this function. And instead of option, we're going to change it to actionName. For the proceedAction, we don't need save and save as. And we're going to define a new case called exit. This option closes the entire application, and we do that by using qt.quit. Below this function, let's define a new one called checkSave. This function checks for the save status and triggers the unsaved dialog whenever necessary. So if it is saved, it calls proceedAction. Otherwise, it creates a new component using qt.createComponent, and we feed the path to our QML file, which is unsaved.qml. We pass the reference of the newly created component to our unsaved dialog property by saying unsaved dialog equals to component.createObjects, and we have to pass the root ID as the argument. Finally, we will show the dialog, and additionally I will call the raise method to bring the dialog to the top. And now let's modify the toolbar click handler method. At the top of the method, I'll set the action name to be equal to option. If option is equal to new or open, these are regarded as unsafe actions, then we have to call check save instead. Let's go to the end of the script again, and here we will listen to the onClosing event, which will be called when the user closes the root window. Inside this method, we will write action name equals to exit. And if there are unsaved progress, then we do not accept the closing of the window. We do this by typing close.accepted equals to false. This prevents the root window from being closed. And finally, we call check save again, which fires up the unsaved dialog. And now let's go to our text area. Here we're going to listen to the onPressed event. So key.onPressed. So here, let's directly set saved to false. So whenever the user presses any keys, the saved status will be set to false. So I found a simple mistake here in unsaved.qml. For the row layout, instead of layouts margins, it should be layout.margins. Now with everything done, let's fire up a terminal and run our application. Let's first open a file. Now since I have no unsaved progress, it will just bring up the file dialog for me to choose a file. And this is the original file text. And if I make some changes here and attempt to open another file, then it will show the unsaved dialog. If I hit cancel, it should just resume. It should just bring back the progress. And if I hit discard, and let's open the same file, and you can see the new changes is not there. And now let's make some new text there, and this time I hit save, and if I bring the same file again, you can see the new changes has been written to the file. Now this also works for the new file option. And now if I directly close this dialog, it is equivalent to cancel. And finally, let's close this without saving. The application just exits as normal. And there we have completed the unsaved dialog and the save status feature. In the next episode, we will work on user preferences and the dark theme. I'm YellowFlicker, and I will see you in the next video. Stay tuned.